Well, the Victorian government is facing criticism over its handling of COVID and contact tracing as an army of health officials reinforce coronavirus rules amid a spike in cases. And the Prime Minister announces a funding boost for agricultural industries devastated by bushfires while spending the day in the Eden Monaro electorate. Joining me now, Sky News host and News Corp columnist Peter Credlin. Peter, great to see you tonight. Bit to unpack again this week. Look, I think Andrews has got egg on his face. I think that, you know, of all the states and territories, Victoria went the hardest when it came to restrictions, and yet now we've got this spike, a serious spike in COVID cases, and the good folk of Victoria are wondering what the hell's happened, and all the hard work's now been undone.
I think two things happen. Well, first of all, I feel like I'm Typhoid Mary. No one interstate wants to know me, but this is the problem for Victorians. I think two things happened. I think one, they screwed the state down so hard with restrictions, as you rightly say, the hardest in the country. And of course, then when Victorians watched those protests, 30,000 of them up and down the main streets of the CBD in Melbourne, and only the three organisers copped a fine, when we know to date Victorians have been hit with more fines than any other resident in any other state. Fines for, you know, taking a learner child out for a driving lesson or sitting in a park. That happens to ordinary people, yet the protesters, if you hold up the right banner, were all okay. And Cedar Meats, which is the abattoir linked to the Labor Party, that was sort of all pushed under the carpet until the outbreak there was out of control. Those two circumstances changed the game for Victorians. And I tell you, after the protests, I was out and about in Melbourne, and I felt a really palpable sense that Victorians were saying, well, bugger it. If they can do that, why should I keep sort of doing all the right things? And that's been the game changer. That's where you are now in Melbourne, at least, where there are suburbs now that we are told don't go into. And those people, if you heard the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian today, she's saying if you're in those hotspots, don't come anywhere New South Wales. South Australia is going to close its border or keep it closed to Victorians. Queensland the same. I mean, we could have this laughable circumstance where everyone can move around Australia except for Dan Andrews' people.
Yeah, which is incredible considering just how harsh the Victorian government went on its citizens. I mean, 4 times the amount of fines imposed in Victoria as in Queensland, 3 times as many as in New South Wales, and yet still they're left in this situation. And of course that then brings us to the Queensland situation, Peter, which I know you've been keeping an incredibly close eye on. We're now seeing the Deputy Premier and Health Minister today very lukewarm on the fact that the borders may reopen again on July 10, which was the original roadmap. The Premier also saying the same thing. So in many respects, it's giving them the ammunition to once again keep the borders closed. And I'll tell you what, businesses, tourism operators in Queensland are absolutely howling at the prospect of this continuing for longer.
Yeah, I'm just interested though to pull that apart a bit, because most of your tourism players are outside of Brisbane, right? And most of those
Correct.
could well be in the LNP ledger. You've got an election obviously in October. So she must be getting polling. She's no rocket scientist, your Premier in Queensland, but she's a political animal and she'll be driven by the polls and, you know, the coterie of Labor hardheads around her. So she would be getting polling that says the seats that they need to win, let's call them Brisbane and South East Queensland predominantly, they must be liking the closed door restrictions. Now, she'll burn herself in Cairns and probably, you know, Townsville and down the coast. She may have already factored them against her, and she's just trying to hold, as most incumbents do, what she's got, and she must be finding the restrictions work for her. The other thing they do, it gets her out in the media every day. It smothers the opposition, makes it much harder for the opposition to get a line-up in the newses at night, and it makes it all about her. And of course she knows if the economy goes south, people will blame the Prime Minister, but if there's COVID infections like we're seeing in Victoria, they tend to blame the Premier. So maybe that's the calculation she's made.
I think that's a really good analysis, Peter. I really do. I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. Now, Eden Monaro, we had the Prime Minister in a beautiful cardigan I noticed there today down in Eden Monaro.
It's cold down there. You would know that, but it's cold down here.
Yeah, Oh, it's cold up here. I'll give you the tip. It's freezing. I'm in my Ugg boots. How important is it for Albanese to win this particular by-election? Do you think his position is under threat if the LNP can pull off a miracle, if the coalition government can pull off a miracle and win the seat?
I was just thinking of Ugg boots there and Kevin Rudd, that terrible image I saw him sitting in at what was a Noosa cafe with his Ugg boots on. Anyway, I like to watch, particularly in a general campaign, so the every 3-year campaign, I like to watch the level of VIP visits, very senior ministers and leaders in and out of marginal seats. It sort of gives me a sense of how the polls are tracking over a 6-week campaign. Interestingly, in this by-election, lots of visitations from the Labor leader. You would expect that. They named a candidate very early. The Libs and Nats had that debacle that went on for some weeks. But he was out there and very visible. I'm not saying it's fallen away, but it doesn't seem to have that same tempo of visit. The Prime Minister, he's doing a lot more visits 10 days out than I might have expected if they thought this had gone to the wall. Now, that probably says it's pretty tight between Labor and Liberal. The unknown quantities here will be the vote that the shooters get, which I'm told is strong. It won't beat the other two, but it's strong. And the vote of the Nats, which I'm told has fallen away quite considerably. And the Nats will obviously preference the Liberals. Shooters are preferencing Labor. And it's how disciplined the preference flows from the shooters are. That'll be the test. Now,
Nestle, they're renaming Redskins and Chicos. They say they don't want to marginalise anyone. It's all part of the sort of cancel culture. I fear for the Golden Gate time, I must say. What are your thoughts on this, Peter? Because, you can understand why big corporations are now folding to these people because they are powerful and they are threatening, and we see it all the time. But it is disappointing, isn't it?
Look, I'm not an American Indian. I don't know whether Redskins are offensive, but if they are, then every Western, every John Wayne movie, every Marlboro man, they're all equally likely to be offensive. And you can change the name of Chicos, but they're still dark babies. That's the shape of the lolly. So do you change the lolly itself? And what is it? Is it a black cat? Is a black cat allowed? Although they're a very different space, but you know what I mean. Like I said, it's more than just the name. Once you go down this path, as I've said, revisionism of any sort, revisionism of culture, revisionism of history, it's a treacherous path, and I fear for this almost constant shame we have with who we are and our history. Now, I haven't heard or seen any prominent Indigenous people demanding that these particular lollies get changed, but it seems to be, the apologists in the public affairs teams and marketing executives in a number of these countries who get a couple of emails come in maybe and they get spooked, or they're all looking to throw themselves into the debate and sort of demonstrate that they are within the zeitgeist. Maybe Nestle went looking for a cause that would enable it to attach itself to Black Lives Matter, but I think this is wrong-headed.
Were you a Redskin fan when you were a kid?
Yes, I was, and I'd actually make them into teeth.
I tell you what, they're filling killers though when you get into your adult years.
Yeah, I've got. This will betray my age, but when I was a kid, for 20 cents in the shoe on the way to netball, I'd come home and I could get a potato cake for 10 cents. I could get a 5-cent Isopol Zupa Duper, and I could get a 5-cent bag of lollies, all for 20 cents, and the bag of lollies was quite big. So there you go. That's how old I am.
Well, Peta Credlin, thanks for joining us tonight on Sky News Across Australia. Good to see you.
Thank you, Gleeson. Bye-bye.